And I gotta admit, it looks really good. But this little plastic brush works wonders. It's plastic, so it's not gonna harm anything in the combustion chamber itself. Here's your little before and after comparison. 3 and 4. Well, there's all of our push rods. You can install the rocker arms. Get these chilling out on top of the valve springs. Real easy if you can roll them all at one time. Now that's a good looking engine. I don't care who you are.
Now you saw me in the last video button up the Challenger's engine, this 5.7 liter Hemi. There's only one thing left that's going to make this Hemi fit in that Challenger, and that is this Milodon pan. Now to get this pan on includes a pickup and a new windage tray, all from Milodon, and we're going to walk through putting this thing on because this sucker is massive. Look at that. Look at that tank on there. So we're going to roll the engine over and throw this sucker on. Pull our valve covers back off from where we never installed them in the last video. Our dipstick, of course, is in the way because I thought it looked cool. We'll need that later. Pull this valve cover off. And the intake. Now we're back to where we started. Now we will attempt to safely roll this engine over. This engine stand is great unless you gotta rotate it, so it gets a little questionable at that point. Okay. Keep your fingers crossed. That scared me. Sorry guys. I know this is a bit questionable. Come on. Maybe I should have done this before putting the cylinder heads on. It's fine. Perfect, easy. You see some of the overspray from where I painted the engine because I didn't even put anything on this. I know that's terrible of me, but whatever. And get this old windage tray off of here if we can. And nothing necessarily wrong with this, but we're just gonna prevent any kind of possibility for oiling failures in the future. I got a really good look at the bottom end of the engine, and man, does it look literally brand new. So again, a testament to the low miles that you can get out of these things. The 64,000 miles strikes again. Love the way it looks under here. Now that the oil pan has been removed, I would like to replace the rear main seal, but I didn't remove this flywheel before I put the engine on the stand, so I'm going to have to do all that right now. It's not the most fun thing in the world, especially when you're by yourself. You can see there are bolts just tucked away ever so awfully right there. The camera won't even focus on it, it's so mad that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I've removed one so far, and doing this by yourself isn't the most fun, so what I've done is jammed a screwdriver down here. I can't move it, it's stuck, but there's a screwdriver in there holding the flywheel still, because if you try to crank on these with a wrench or anything, it's just going to rotate the whole engine. There's so much torque on them. So I've doubled up my wrenches. These are 17mm bolts, so I've taken and added the rounded end, the closed end on the bolt itself, and then I'm taking the other closed end of an extra wrench and using it for extra leverage, and then just pulling on it to make it actually come loose. I've already broken this one loose, obviously, but you can see that that's a way to do it. It's really not the best way, but it's a way to get in there on a tight space like that and get a little extra leverage off a wrench. Just be careful. Don't let these suckers slip. I busted my pinky right here one time, and it never healed right. It's actually a little lopsided now. But anyway, it works, so just be careful if you're ever going to do something like that. Okay. You're joking. Ring gear. Too big for bolts. We're trapped. So I got all the bolts out of the rear main seal after that flex plate was removed, and I had to bend back this like flat piece of space or whatever. I'm not gonna have to reuse this, so it doesn't really matter. So I'm just gonna try and work the seal out of here, and it's stuck too. Good. Oh, come on, come on, come on. Don't let me down, don't let me down. You gotta be kidding me. Thank you. Something that's really neat about these newer rear main seals is that they are one piece. And you can see that it's all one rubber seal around the entire thing. While on these older engines, they were actually a two-piece design where two rubber halves would go on each side of the crankshaft. While this one literally would just slip and bolt to the back side of the block. Nice. So what that piece of plastic is for is to make sure that this inner seal on the lip right here is going to keep from rolling in. See how it's tapered towards the crankshaft. This is the inside, so it's tapered towards it. So what it does is, as oil pressure is applied, it's going to push against the crankshaft outward, and that keeps it from leaking. Now, if this were to be turned around the opposite direction, and you had it to where the pressure is pushing it against the fold, then it would just simply roll over, and pressure would just blow right out. So that's why it's built that way. But if you had this lip to where it would roll out, to where it got rolled up into the crank itself without that plastic, then you won't have a good seal. So that's what that plastic is there for. It just ensures to make sure that everything installs properly. So it's a good thing to have that and make sure you install it that way. Before we bolt on the oil pan, we do have to make sure we have the proper pickup. Now this is a Mylodon conversion pickup. This is for the 2008 and earlier oil pan. And this will complement just perfectly with our new oil pan from Mylodon. We'll go over the details in it in just a second. The good thing about Mylodon is that they do package their stuff very nicely because it's idiot proof for people like me. And when we actually took the pickup off, when we disassembled the engine, I simply just stuck the bolts back in place. So that way it makes it easy for when I go to put everything back together. It's all two bolts, and I like that because it's where you don't have to have any guesswork for where the pickup needs to go. There's two mounting places, and simple as that. You bolt it in, torque it down to spec, and you can easily bolt this on in like 2 seconds. It's taking me longer than 2 seconds because I can't talk and work at the same time, obviously. Oh, and one little tip here. You ever got a cut that just will not stop bleeding? Make you a little zip tie band-aid. You can see right there. Took a paper towel because it would not stop bleeding. I got tired of holding it, so I just took a zip tie and wrapped around it. Had to do this before. Works pretty good, so if you're ever in a bind and you just don't feel like getting out of the shop to go get a band-aid, use a zip tie. Now what's neat about this windage tray from Mylodon is that it is a lot better than the factory unit. They actually use these on their drag pack edition challengers, and that's incredible. I'm just test fitting stuff right now, just looking at it. So you can see here we've got the new windage tray,
and you can see it's got provisions for the oil pump itself, and then the pickup. And here's the pickup in place. So we'll have to bolt all this down. What we'll have to do is put a gasket down first, and then set the windage tray on, and then set another gasket on top. And at some point we'll have to bolt down the pickup and torque it down to 21 foot-pounds. I got my torque wrench over here. We'll kind of have to work a little bit quick on this because we don't want anything to like set up and dry. I like to put a little RTV on the gaskets themselves just to ensure nothing leaks. The benefits of this windage tray are pretty neat. So they've got the crankcase pretty much fully encapsulated besides where the oil pump is, and that makes it easy for maintenance if you want to take the pickup off. So if we remove this, you can see that there are baffles here, and it's meant to, as the crank is rotating, you're allowing oil to splash back easily into the oil pan to be picked up again, or that way I should say. So, and then what I think is pretty neat here is that they've got this little baffle, like a guard. So as oil is winding around the crankcase, it's going to be caught by this baffle right here and then sent down like in this motion right here. And as it catches and hits this baffle, it's going to stop right there. Instead of just continuing and throwing against the pan on the side, it's actually going to stop right here and then be able to drain back faster. So I think that's really neat design. And what's interesting about these pans right here from Mylodon is that they actually come on the new Challenger drag packs. So those Challengers that you see popping wheelies from the factory, they come with this Mylodon windage tray. So if they can use it and beat on those Hemis and not run out of oil, surely this one will work for my stock 5.7. So let's talk about the beauty that is the Mylodon Conversion Road Race oil pan. So you can see right here, sucker is wide. Look at that. All that extra capacity down there. And we've got a bunch of baffles. You hear that rattling around? Your pickup is going to sit right here. And all these little trap doors are going to keep oil right here and only allow for it to stay right in this area, so that the oil pan is going to be centralizing where the oil is picking up. So it's not going to be sloshing over here, it's going to stay right in the middle. And what's neat about it is that it's meant for hard cornering, and that's why it's called the road race pan. Look right here, this baffle opens towards the middle, but it does not go back the other direction. It will lock that oil in place. So if you're doing some hard cornering, stopping, accelerating, it's going to keep it all in the same place. So the oil is allowed to come in, but it will not go back out. And that's what makes it the road race pan. It makes it so much easier to keep oiling issues from being a problem. It keeps all of it right there where you need it. And then you have that extra capacity, so that's a lot nicer. Now they do offer just a regular conversion pan for the Hemi. They showed me this one and said, you really ought to check this one out. Before I start, I want to lay a bead of RTV right here where the rear main actually meets the block. As well as where the timing cover meets the block. Just a little added extra insurance in case we need it. So I've taken our first gasket and run a very thin layer of RTV on both sides. I cut it to where it all was very even and had plenty to work with. So we get all our bolt holes lined up. Now we will take the windage tray, drop it in place. Now we need to bolt down our pickup to 21 foot-pounds. Okay. Now for the second gasket. Now hopefully if we did it all right, all of our holes will line up. So far so good. Now check that out. What we've done is rotated the engine back over after getting the oil pan on, and I bolted on, just temporarily, our alternator, which is all factory parts, might I add. These are all factory replacement stuff. All I did was go to O'Reilly and order an alternator and AC compressor for an 06 Jeep Grand Cherokee, because that is what this engine came from, which is what this timing cover comes from. Now, this is all great and dandy. Everything bolts on fine. No issues here, except on the AC compressor, we're going to have a bit of an issue. So what you see here is the factory configuration. The old mounts from Chrysler actually bolt one here, 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 and here. And unfortunately, we're going to have to do a little modification to the AC compressor. We do have 3 mounting points. There are supposed to be 4, but the new mount from Mancini Racing actually mounts here, here, and right here. Now, if we were using a truck timing cover, this would be no issue at all, because it actually mounts the AC compressor right around here. But since we're using the Jeep Grand Cherokee timing cover, we're going to have to do something about this. And since we have 3 points of mounting, I think we're going to be okay. We're going to cut this off right here and then smooth that out, make it flat. So we'll have to get rid of this and then bolt it back on and make sure our mounts work. But that's just the only issue that I've seen so far, is that the AC compressor is going to be very close. But the good news is, besides, we have to just fix that, and then hopefully everything will be okay. So we smoothed out this back side right here. We got to go back and finish it up just a little bit and clean it up nicer. But you can see that we cut it off and we made room for our engine mount. Now, the only thing that is a problem now is that when this bolt is fully seated, I tightened it down as hard as I could, it's now hitting right here. So what we're going to have to do is 2 things. I've already done one of those. I filed down this back side right here. And the reason I did that was so that way when the nut right here that's welded onto the mount can fully seat the bolt. You can see here, if I back the bolt all the way out, now I've got a little wiggle room between the mount and the bolt. Actually, right there will be centered up on the mounting hole up above. So you see that, I mean, you can't really see from this angle, but I've got the tiniest little bit of room between here, right here. So what I can do is, on top of filing that down, I'm able to tighten the bolt to where I've got complete engagement through this jam nut. I've got threads coming back through the other side, so the bolt itself is fully engaged in the mount. But I'll have to come back here and cut off this extra bit. So we'll have to measure the difference between here and right here and just see how much extra we're going to have to cut off. And once we get to that point, then we'll be able to actually bolt everything down for good. And thus concludes our massaging to make sure that the air compressor works with our new engine mounts. You can see that we have a very close fit right in here. I have to go back and finish this up like I mentioned a second ago, but this will be cleaned up. I just trimmed this bolt down and cut it to fit, and you can barely see it, but there is a tiniest little bit of gap right in between there. So once the bolt is actually fully cranked down, it won't be hitting here. I may take a little bit more off this side whenever I clean this up, but overall we have a fitting AC compressor and a fitting engine mount. And what you'll see here is I've actually had to make a slight modification to the cross member to make the engine fit. So on this timing cover, you saw me, I had to make a little bit of a modification for the AC compressor to fit next to the mount. But you'll notice that right there is that slot on the left side is where the mount actually bolts. So that means that the AC compressor is going to be right there as well. And I'll show you this little piece that I had cut out previously. So that was sitting right there, and you can see how much I actually had to cut out to make this work. And I don't know if it's going to fit just yet. I still have to test fit the engine, obviously. So we're going to drop it in there and make sure we have enough clearance. So instead of bringing the tractor in, we're actually going to do this with the engine hoist, mainly because it is raining outside. So 1, don't want to get the tractor wet, and 2, don't want to have to be putting the engine in the driveway and get it wet as well. So we're going to do this by hand. This hoist is probably older than I am, so it's kind of questionable about its abilities. Does not want to roll that great, but we'll try it anyway. But right now, I'm about to take it off of the stand. That way we can set the engine on the ground, because I have to fit the bell housing up to the back of the engine, so that way we can actually cut the input shaft to fit inside the crank because we have a roller bearing for it. So we'll drop the engine down real quick and then we'll go through that step. This is not an ideal situation. What I had forgotten to do in my haste was extend these legs out right here and actually lengthen them so that way it'll actually counterbalance the weight of the engine. And as soon as I bolted it off of the stand, everything just fell forward. Thankfully, the Mylodon pan is tough and caught everything. I'll have to pick up the engine and make sure that the pan is okay, but the engine looks okay. I mean, it barely missed the alternator and compressor. And look here, look how close that is. Barely just missed it. So it's fine. We'll just have to make sure that the pan is not damaged. So I don't really know what to do here besides try again. Nobody got hurt. Could have been a heck of a lot worse, but that's just one of those things. Don't get in a rush. And don't be like me. Well, certainly not what I had in mind, but the bell housing is bolted on. So now we need to make sure that we can actually use this pilot bearing because this crankshaft is not drilled for a manual transmission. The depth of the crank is not long enough, basically. So we have to use a roller bearing to make it work. So Brewers Performance actually hooked us up with this nice little roller bearing for the input shaft on the transmission. We do have to modify the transmission to make it work, but this is a heck of a lot easier than pulling the crank and getting it drilled. So what we have to do first is actually measure the back of the crankshaft for the torque converter register. And we want to see how far out the back face of the bell housing is. And it looks like right at 7.5 inches. So now we're going to move over to the transmission. I'm going to go for 1/4 inch extra just for that little bit of extra safety. So we're going to shoot for 7 3/4 inch from the face right here, which is where our bell housing is going to meet, to however far it needs to go out here. So if we measure right here, looks like currently we're about actually right at 8.5 inches. So we're 1 inch too long. So what we need to do is cut 3/4 inch off of here. Well, all that trauma is over with. We ground down the input shaft to make it work, and it does work. It's actually, the transmission is fully seated, the roller bearing is installed, everything's good to go. And when I bolted it up, it didn't interfere with the backside of the crankshaft, so we are good. Now the next thing that we have to do is tear it all back apart. We've got to actually get everything out so that we can put the new flywheel and pressure plate and the clutch in that came from Brewers Performance. But this is a major step off of the list that we had to do before we can even put the engine in, because that's a lot of measuring and grinding and cutting to make sure that it's going to fit. Now right here is what I'm really excited about, our flywheel and clutch combo. What this is a 10.5 inch clutch from McCool to fit our 5.7 liter Hemi. And 10.5 inch meaning that it'll fit our 833 bell housing that will really come in a factory Challenger. So this will actually fit the 833 transmission and then fit an 833 style clutch and pressure plate. So it's basically drilled for the 8-bolt crankshaft that bolts to the backside of the Hemi. The only thing is that the bolts are metric, and that's where Brewers comes in for one more time to give us these metric bolts to bolt to the crankshaft and make our flywheel work. Now this is a neutral balanced flywheel, and what that means is that there are no weights on this thing at all. There's nothing to balance this thing because the engine is already balanced internally. It's balanced on the inside, and we don't have to worry about making any kind of counterweights on this thing. So all we have to do is bolt everything up. So our first step here is to put the flywheel on. So you want to basically treat this thing like a brake rotor. They're going to ship this stuff with some oil on it to keep it from rusting while they're in shipping or storage. So we're just going to do a preliminary wipe down just to get all the residue off of it and any kind of possible machining stuff, basically. Any kind of burrs that possibly might still be there, but there's a bug that just crawled across the floor, so that's great. But alright, so we got everything basically clean, so look at all that. That's the stuff that keeps it from rusting, but you don't want that on your clutch. Right, so now we'll try to slide this thing on. Fingers crossed. Now that the flywheel is fully seated, I backed all the bolts back out, and I'm going to take a little bit of this red thread locker right here, put on each of these bolts, and then run them back in. And that just gives that extra little bit of insurance to make sure that this thing isn't coming out. So I'm going to do this to all 8. I'll be right back. Put a socket and a ratchet on the crank bolts. Hopefully that'll hold it down while we torque on it. And again, this is 30 foot-pounds to start out with. Now we'll ramp up to 55. Now before we go on to put the pressure plate and clutch on, we want to make sure we take a little bit of brake parts cleaner here and just spray down the surface. That'll get any of those extra contaminants off and those fingerprints that I might have left. Get everything off of it real nice and clean. And wipe it down with a rag. Check that out. Now where the pedal feel comes from is this pressure plate. This all was ordered through Brewers and is made by Ram Clutches. So this is the pressure plate here. It is a 10.5 inch pressure plate for a 10.5 inch clutch, and what it does is it's meant for a more street friendly application. So it'll handle the horsepower of the engine, but on top of that give a firm pedal feel, but not something that's going to blow your knee out. So that's really what we want. We want something that's going to have a nice firm pedal, but something that's not grabby, it's not going to be chattery, and it's not going to break our knee. Basically, it's a 2,400 pound pressure plate, so it's pretty light, and it's going to have a good feel and a good firm clutch pedal. So on top of that, we have this we have the clutch disc right here. I'm not going to take it out of the bag just yet so I don't contaminate it, but you can see here it's got all these nice springs in it to avoid any of that chattering. So it's a good, nice friction material. I like the way that this thing looks. It's going to be an awesome little piece right here. I'm excited to see how this actually feels once it's in the car. Now, when I talked to Brewers, they were very adamant about this clutch package right here. They really enjoy it. They use it on their personal cars. So if they use it on their personal vehicles, I don't see why it wouldn't be great for the Challenger. I'm going to peel this off and do the exact same thing that we did on the flywheel. So you can see all that oil right there. That's again just keeping it from rusting. So we want to take a little bit of brake clean, go around the surface, wipe her down, and do a few passes, because look at that right there. It took a little paint with it, but hey, it's well worth it to get that off of the clutch disc, because you don't want to leave this on here, because that's going to cause slipping, chattering. That's stuff that you don't want in your clutch at all. You want to have a nice firm pedal feel, and this is just a nice little safe precaution to make sure that happens. Clean. Now that our clutch disc is just chilling there, we are going to line up our pressure plate. I got these bolts here because I didn't have any. These are from Brewers, so thank you guys for supplying these. Now these are called to do 30 foot-pounds. I'm going to start at 20 and then work my way around just to make sure we aren't cranking too hard on one side. Now throughout all this, we're leaving that alignment tool in place. We don't want to take it out too early, so we want to make sure that it stays exactly where it is until everything's bolted down. So we did the fitness test last night. It is the next day, and everything looks good. We spun it over on the tail shaft, and everything is cooperating. We moved the crank bolt, and it worked. So we're going to call that a win. Well, there's a bit of good news. Looks like the oil pan is okay. You've got no damage on the bottom side. Thankfully, it landed very flat. So get the light here so you can see it a little better. It landed very flat, like right on the end of it. So the thing about it is that all those extra baffles and those trap doors I was telling you about actually kept the pan from crushing. So a regular stamped steel pan would have probably been toast. But thankfully Milodon, you guys make really good oil pans, so you just saved our build. The engine's off the ground safely this time. We're going to see if this thing will actually roll now. We got to drop the Challenger down off of the stands, and then we can roll it outside and start trying to put an engine in. So I just had a quick realization that, hey, now might be a good time to make sure that the starter is going to work. Now I have a Dakota mini starter here. This is like from a 92 or 93 318 Magnum. It's just it'll bolt right up to this bell housing. Used them many times. The only issue is I didn't know if it was going to fit with the Hemi, if there's anything was going to cause an issue. So I tried to bolt it on, and good thing I stopped myself, because as you can see here, when we try to line it up and everything, we're actually hitting these two mounting tabs right here in the very back. See, though, there's two little tabs. They're just threaded holes. They're not doing anything. I don't know what they're for, but it's going to prevent us from lining up a bolt on this top hole. We can get on the bottom side, and we can almost get the starter lined up and bolted in, but we just can't. So I'm going to grind back these two right here. They're not doing anything. We'll just grind them to where they're right flush with the oil pan. There's the result. There we go.
Well, the engine's back on the stand. Why is that? It did not work. So what happened was we had actually run into a couple issues. So you saw me install the clutch, the pressure plate, and the flywheel and the bell housing to install in the car. Now typically if you're doing that with a 318, 340, or a 360, that's not a problem. But this engine is not wanting to cooperate, basically, because the way the mounts were in conjunction with the oil pan, it did not want to just drop straight in. So that was what the issue was. So we took the bell housing off, got a little more room. Then we took the pressure plate and clutch off, got a little more room. Then we're like, we can't take the flywheel off because like it's going to be hard to put it back in whenever we go to install everything. So I'm like, let's just reevaluate. And we even took this side of the motor mount off to try to make the pan work, but unfortunately it just will not fit. It was fitting on the other side, but right here it was hitting the cross member mount brace, and I can't cut that much out to make this fit, unfortunately. Now there are some vehicles that I'm sure this pan will work on, but the Challenger, it just will not work, and at least my application for whatever reason. So if it were cut out maybe right here and then straightened out, we probably could make it work. But instead of doing that, I'm just going to get their non-extra capacity pan. It's okay. It's not a big deal. I just hate that the engine didn't get put in, so I apologize for that. I really was looking forward to seeing that go and let you guys see that, and have that victory finally to see the engine in the car after all this time, but it just did not happen this video. The next time though, we are going to have this engine sorted out. We have to get the pan, and then we're going to have to make a little modification right here to the oil adapter. We can make this work. We might just have to cut this off instead of having a remote filter. We'll just cut it off right here and then get a really short filter. The pan was not affected whenever it hit the ground. It landed flat, and it actually landed pretty soft, surprisingly. So that did not affect this pan going in the car. That's just how sometimes that things work. But we're not going to get discouraged. We're going to keep pushing forward with it and make some progress on the next go around. So thank you guys for watching. If you liked the video, please leave a like down below. If you have a question for me, feel free to leave a comment. Order your t-shirts and your stickers. The Challenger shirts are back in stock, so make sure you get one of those. Support Junkyard Digs while you're at it. Go join the Facebook page if you want your project at the end of the video. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.